We're back for your ears only. I'm Eddie Robinson.
I'm David Alpern with this quote from the news. People have to take responsibility. That was British Prime Minister David Cameron demanding full disclosure by Barclays Bank after it agreed to pay $450 million to settle charges of improper rate manipulation. Now this.
As you might imagine, I disagree with the Supreme Court's decision, and I agree with the dissent. What the court did not do on its last day in session, I will do on my first day if elected President of the United States. And that is, I will act to repeal Obamacare.
If for nothing else, today's health care decision underscores the importance of this election.
Well, it should be pretty clear by now that I didn't do this because it was good politics. I did it because I believed it was good for the country.
As Mitt Romney, House Majority Leader Eric Cantor, and President Obama made clear last week, Supreme Court confirmation of Obamacare only moves the fight over it back to the political arena, both on Capitol Hill and in the presidential and congressional election campaigns. And while Obama could claim a victory for his hallmark legislative effort, the 5-4 High Court decision, with Chief Justice John Roberts as the surprising swing vote, also angered and energized Republican conservatives.
A Supreme Court ruling against most of Arizona's contentious immigration law also energized supporters and opponents, especially the increasingly important Latino vote. And there were questions about the political impact of a Republican House contempt of Congress vote against Attorney General Eric Holder for refusing to turn over yet more documents about the botched Fast and Furious gun tracing program. To consider these and other political issues of the week, we're joined again by Julian Zelizer, Princeton Professor of History and Public Affairs. His books include Arsenal of Democracy, Jimmy Carter, and Governing America, new from Princeton University Press. Welcome back to our show.
Thanks for having me.
How do you see the Obamacare decision affecting the presidential campaign, especially after reports that Romney raised millions of dollars because of it that day?
I think it's made it more important in some ways for both sides. Democrats see the stakes of what's going to happen in November, whether this program will be protected now that it's constitutional. And for Republicans, it's the argument that Mitt Romney made. If the Supreme Court won't repeal this, I will. So I think both sides are going to be energized by this. The question is if Republicans will be a little more enthusiastic about going to the polls.
What about the issue of the court itself, its critical importance here, and the fact that the next president may well have another seat to name?
Yeah, I think Democrats might have taken the next court for granted a little bit, but a case like this puts everyone's eyes on what's going on. And, all of a sudden, Justice Roberts and Ginsburg and all the justices loom much larger in the political imagination. So I think Democrats are certainly going to be thinking a lot more about who will replace any retiring justice.
The U.S. stock market fell only modestly after the Supreme Court decision, then bounced way up after a new deal in Europe to help struggling banks there. Surveys also show no massive U.S. job losses so far because of Obamacare mandates. How will all that impact Republicans trying to make Obamacare an economic issue?
Well, I think it's a tough one. I think people are looking at the unemployment numbers. They're looking at the stock market. But certainly the one place they might be able to mobilize people, it's business itself. And if there's any anxiety about the cost this will have on their businesses, even if it's indirect, I think that's how they could start raising money like Mitt Romney did. But in the end, I don't think this is front and center an economic issue.
What fallout do you see from the court upholding the individual mandate as a government tax, though Obama specifically denied that it was?
It's a very confusing ruling. I think people are looking at it a few days after, and they're seeing that Justice Roberts in some ways changed what the legislation was, and in other ways agreed with the dissent on much of the law. I think certainly Republicans are going to use that language and try to argue, as they have in the first few days, that this was a tax increase, and try to say, here's a tax and spend Democrat, and that's what he did with this legislation.
Do you see important sectors of the healthcare community mobilizing behind Obama now to preserve the new system? That might mean more income for hospitals, drug companies, and managed care operations that focus more on maintaining health than treating illness?
Absolutely. Look, for the insurance industry, this could be a bonanza. They have all these uninsured people who are now going to be purchasing health care, and many other people, if premiums go down, will be able to afford this at a calmer pace. So, with Medicare, doctors opposed it when it was passed in 1965, and within a year or two, they realized this meant a lot of money for them. And I think a lot of the people who have stakes in healthcare are going to realize this might be good for the bottom line, and they might very well support the administration. That's what Obama's been hoping for from day one.
Let's turn to the Latino vote, which Obama has now wooed with an executive order to suspend deportation of some young illegals brought here as kids. New polling suggests that move has given the president an even bigger share of Hispanics and made them more likely to vote.
Well, we'll see what the long-term effect is. It was an executive decision. It was done through a directive. So it's not the kind of issue like health care that goes through the legislative process and really mobilizes a lot of people. The other thing is Latinos have also been a little skeptical about this administration and its failure to fulfill certain promises. So we have to see how long this lasts and what other issues pop up in the next month or two, and whether he'll enjoy the huge advantage that he's hoping for going into the election.
You also see Obama's executive action on immigration as meant to split Republican voters already divided on the issue. Talk about the effectiveness of such action in past presidencies.
Well, Republicans are a divided party. Half the party is very strongly pro-immigration, and the other half has a strong anti-immigration stand on both illegals and some on legals as well. So the party wants to split. The president wants to split the party. Sometimes this works. FDR did it with Republicans, splitting progressive Republicans versus traditional conservatives on social legislation. But it's a tricky move, and so we'll see. Especially since economics is what most voters are thinking about. We'll see if this has the kind of high impact he's hoping for.
Another legal political issue last week involved the first ever contempt of Congress vote against a cabinet member, Attorney General Eric Holder, for ignoring a subpoena for more fast and furious documents. The Justice Department says it will not prosecute because President Obama has invoked executive privilege. What are the chances of a successful civil action by congressional Republicans to get what they want?
I think so far there's not evidence of a big story looming behind the story, so I'm not sure that's going to happen. I'm not sure the Republicans want to do that. I think what the congressional Republicans want to do is keep the air of corruption and keep the appearance of corruption front and center going into the election. I'm not sure they're going to even have the will within their own party to continue moving forward with this. I think there's mixed messages about how much value this has.
We talked in an earlier segment about the Supreme Court decision itself, and we've mentioned it here. But how do you come away how does your view of Justice Roberts and the Roberts Court come away from all of this week's activity?
Well, look, Roberts comes out looking better, I think, for most Americans. He's a conservative who ended up siding with this legislation and arguing it was constitutional. But I think, again, the more you look at the case, I think both sides are going to find things to dislike. I think a lot of Democrats and liberals are taking a second look and saying Roberts is exactly what he appeared to be. He, in fact, knocked down the federal power to deal with a lot of national issues with the Commerce Clause, and even threw things in such as the Medicaid provisions that will make this law harder to implement. So this is a case where Roberts comes out looking good, but on second glance, I think both sides are going to be seeing someone who's more familiar than they thought.
Julian Zelizer is a Princeton professor of history and public affairs. His books include Arsenal of Democracy, Jimmy Carter, and Governing America from Princeton University Press.
Quote from the news, "I think the military are giving a few things to the Muslim Brotherhood and keeping what is essential." That was Hossam Issa, a prominent Egyptian lawyer, on the court order that suspended a military decree permitting soldiers to arrest civilians. Came 2 days after the announcement that Muslim Brotherhood leader Mohamed Morsi had been elected Egypt's first civilian president.
Next, child abuse beyond the Sandusky verdict, for your ears only.